The doctor said the arsenic should have killed me within hours, but somehow I survived. And when the dust settled, my daughter-in-law Victoria didn't inherit my fortune like she planned. Instead, she inherited a murder charge and a lawsuit that would destroy everything she thought she was entitled to. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But let me start from the beginning, when my biggest worry was whether the roses in my garden would bloom before the spring frost hit Willowbrook. At 71, I had finally learned to savor the quiet moments. The morning sun streaming through the kitchen windows of my colonial home on Elmhurst Drive. The familiar weight of my favorite ceramic mug. The blue one with tiny painted daisies that my late husband Theodore had given me for our 20th anniversary. The gentle hum of the coffee maker that had been faithfully brewing my morning cup for the past 15 years. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. And until 6 months ago, I thought I understood what family meant. I'd lived in Willowbrook, Connecticut for 43 years, watching the small town transform from a sleepy farming community into a charming suburb that attracted young families and retirees alike. Theodore and I had raised our son Benjamin here, in this very house with its wraparound porch and century-old oak tree that still provided perfect shade for summer barbecues. Theodore passed away 4 years ago after a brief battle with pneumonia. The grief had been overwhelming at first. 52 years of marriage doesn't end quietly. But gradually I'd found my rhythm as a widow. Tuesday book club at the Willowbrook Public Library. Wednesday volunteer shifts at the animal shelter. Friday dinner with my bridge group at Romano's Italian restaurant. Sundays tending to my prize-winning rose garden that had been featured twice in the Willowbrook Gazette. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Theodore had been a successful architect, and his careful financial planning meant I was comfortable. Not wealthy by celebrity standards, but secure enough to maintain our family home, take the occasional cruise, and know that I'd never be a burden to anyone. Benjamin had married Victoria Ashford 3 years ago, and I'd tried so hard to welcome her into our family. She was beautiful, certainly, tall and willowy with platinum blonde hair that looked like it cost more to maintain than most people spent on groceries. At 28, she was 15 years younger than Benjamin, but love was love, I told myself. Theodore and I had a 12-year age gap, and we'd been blissfully happy. But something about Victoria had always felt calculated. The way she'd comment on the potential of my antique furniture, suggesting I might consider updating my decor. How she'd mention, seemingly casually, that the house was quite large for one person, and wouldn't I be so much happier in one of those new senior living communities with organized activities and healthcare on site. I'd chalked it up to generational differences. Young people today seem to change things constantly. New phones, new cars, new furniture. Victoria probably couldn't understand why anyone would want to keep the same dining room set for 30 years, or drive a 2015 Honda Civic when they could afford something more modern. Benjamin seemed happy, and that was what mattered to me. My son had always been ambitious, working his way up to vice president at Hartwell and Associates Financial Planning. He'd bought a lovely home in the new development across town, one of those modern places with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that Victoria posted endlessly on her social media accounts. I'd learned to navigate Victoria's moods and comments, focusing instead on the joy of having family nearby. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Benjamin would help me tend the garden while Victoria scrolled through her phone, occasionally looking up to suggest that I should hire a landscaping service instead of working so hard at my age. The comments had grown more frequent recently. Subtle suggestions about my driving. "Are you sure you should be on the highway at night, Eleanor?" My memory. You told me that story already, remember? And my living situation. This house is so isolated. What if something happened and no one found you for days? The federal charges are completely separate from our civil proceedings, Amanda replied. However, Mrs. Rodriguez's cooperation with federal investigators has been noted by the prosecution, and your complete compliance with the asset transfer may be viewed favorably during sentencing. Elena had deliberately structured her approach to give Jonathan incentives for cooperation while making resistance pointless. If he attempted to fight the civil proceedings, the evidence would be presented in public court filings that would further damage his reputation and provide additional ammunition for federal prosecutors. If he accepted the settlement, he could begin serving his prison sentence with the knowledge that his family's financial situation was stable and that his professional consequences were limited to the inevitable result of his criminal behavior. "There's one additional matter," Amanda said, producing a final document from her binder. "Mrs. Rodriguez requires that you sign a comprehensive non-compete agreement that will prevent you from working in the strategic consulting industry for 5 years. This restriction applies specifically to any work that might involve the methodologies, client relationships, or intellectual property that you fraudulently attempted to claim." The non-compete agreement was Elena's insurance policy against Jonathan attempting to trade on their shared history to rebuild his career in their industry. She had no interest in preventing him from earning a living, but she was determined to ensure that he could never again profit from expertise and relationships that belonged to her. As Jonathan signed document after document, formally transferring control of everything he had assumed was his, Elena felt a profound sense of justice being served with mathematical precision. She had built their success through competence, innovation, and genuine value creation. Jonathan had attempted to steal that success through fraud, conspiracy, and betrayal. The legal system was simply restoring assets to their rightful owner, while ensuring that criminal behavior faced appropriate consequences. When the final signatures were completed, Elena stood and extended her hand to Jonathan with the professional courtesy she would show to any former business associate. "I wish you success in whatever path you choose next," she said, meaning it sincerely. "Perhaps this experience will help you discover what you're actually capable of accomplishing through your own efforts." As Jonathan and his legal team left the conference room, Elena remained behind with Amanda to discuss the implementation timeline for the complete corporate restructuring. Tomorrow morning, Rodriguez Strategic Consulting would officially begin operations under Elena's sole leadership, serving clients who had already expressed enthusiasm about working exclusively with the consultant they had always recognized as the real strategic genius behind Meridian Consulting Group's success. 3 months later, Elena stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new corner office on the 32nd floor of Columbia Tower, Seattle's most prestigious business address, watching the late afternoon sun cast golden light across Elliott Bay. The office was 3 times larger than her previous workspace at Meridian Consulting Group, with a panoramic view that included Mount Rainier on clear days and a conference table that could accommodate the board meetings of the Fortune 500 companies that now comprised the majority of her client base. Rodriguez Strategic Consulting had not only survived the dramatic restructuring, it had thrived beyond Elena's most optimistic projections. The company had secured 8 new major contracts in 12 weeks, expanded its staff by 40%, and established international partnerships that positioned them for global expansion. The business press had been unanimous in their assessment. Elena Rodriguez was not just a survivor of corporate betrayal, but a visionary leader who had used crisis as a catalyst for unprecedented growth. Her assistant knocked and entered with the kind of respectful efficiency that Elena had always dreamed of experiencing. "Mrs. Rodriguez, your 4 p.m. appointment is here. Should I have them wait in the small conference room?" Elena checked her reflection in the window. Her new Chanel suit looked appropriately authoritative, and her recent haircut projected confidence without aggression. "No, please send them directly in. And could you arrange for coffee service? I suspect this conversation may take some time." When I returned to the living room with the tea service, Victoria was examining the family photos on my mantelpiece. She held up a picture of Theodore and me from our last vacation to Maine, both of us grinning despite the rain that had soaked us during our lighthouse tour. "You know, Eleanor, you've been so brave since Theodore passed," she said, setting the photo down with deliberate care. "Living here all alone, maintaining this big house, trying to keep up with everything. It's really quite admirable." I poured the tea, noting how Victoria's compliment somehow felt like criticism. "Thank you, dear. I manage quite well, actually." "Oh, I'm sure you do your best." Victoria accepted her cup with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But Benjamin and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. Really worried." Benjamin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We think, that you might be happier somewhere with more support, more people around." "I have plenty of people around," I said, gesturing toward the window. "Mrs. Patterson next door, the Kowalskis across the street, my book club, my volunteer work." "But what about medical emergencies?" Victoria interrupted, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "What if you fell down those steep stairs? What if you had a heart attack in the middle of the night? By the time anyone found you, it could be too late." The scenarios she painted were vivid and frightening, and I could see Benjamin nodding along, his face creased with worry. This wasn't the first time such concerns had been raised, but the way Victoria presented them felt almost rehearsed. "I have my medical alert bracelet," I said, touching the device around my wrist, "and I'm in excellent health for my age." "For now," Victoria said softly. "But things can change so quickly at your age. One minute you're fine, the next." She trailed off, shaking her head as if the thought was too terrible to complete. I sipped my tea, trying to process the conversation. The liquid was perfectly brewed. I'd been making tea the same way for 50 years, but something tasted slightly off. Maybe I'd used a different brand of tea bags. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Victoria and Benjamin exchanged a look that excluded me entirely. It was a married couple's silent communication, the kind Theodore and I had perfected over 5 decades together. But this look felt calculating rather than loving. "There's a beautiful assisted living community in West Hartford," Victoria said, pulling out her phone. "Sunset Manor. It's absolutely gorgeous, more like a resort than a care facility. They have a dining room with professional chefs, organized activities, even a salon." She showed me pictures on her phone, elegant common areas, spacious apartments, smiling residents engaged in various activities. It looked nice enough, but it wasn't home. "The best part," Victoria continued, her voice growing more animated, "is that they handle everything. Housekeeping, meal preparation, medication management, transportation. You wouldn't have to worry about maintaining this big house anymore." "But I don't worry about maintaining it," I said. "I enjoy caring for my home." "Mom," Benjamin said gently, "you're not getting any younger. Wouldn't it be nice to have someone else handle the heavy lifting?" "Literally?" As we talked, I noticed that Victoria kept glancing at my teacup, watching how much I drank. When I set it down half empty, she immediately offered to refill it from the pot. "You've barely touched your tea," she said, with what seemed like genuine concern. "Are you feeling all right?" Actually, I wasn't feeling entirely well. My stomach felt unsettled, and there was a strange metallic taste in my mouth that hadn't been there when I'd first sipped the tea. I attributed it to stress. Difficult conversations had always affected my digestion. "I'm fine," I said, accepting the refill, "just thinking about what you've said." "The timing is actually perfect," Victoria continued, her enthusiasm building. "There's a waiting list for Sunset Manor, but they just had a cancellation. If we act quickly, we could secure you a spot." "How quickly?" I asked. "They need an answer by Monday, and if you decide to move forward, they'd prefer you to move in within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. The timeline felt impossibly rushed, almost aggressive. I'd lived in this house for over 4 decades, raised my son here, buried my husband from the front parlor. The idea of packing up my entire life in 2 weeks felt overwhelming. "That seems very fast," I said. "The best opportunities always require quick action," Victoria replied smoothly. "And honestly, Eleanor, the sooner you make this transition, the easier it will be. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to adapt to change." My head was starting to feel fuzzy, and the metallic taste was getting stronger. I wondered if I might be coming down with something. Perhaps a stomach bug that was affecting my ability to think clearly. I need time to consider this properly, I said, setting down my teacup with hands that felt suddenly unsteady. Victoria's expression tightened, almost imperceptibly. Of course you do. But remember, Eleanor, this opportunity won't wait forever. And we're only thinking of what's best for you. As they prepared to leave, Victoria gave me an unusually warm hug, holding on longer than she ever had before. "Promise me you'll think seriously about this," she whispered in my ear. "For everyone's sake." After they left, I sat in my living room feeling strangely disconnected from my surroundings. The familiar space seemed to shimmer at the edges, and my thoughts felt sluggish, like I was thinking through molasses. I looked at the tea service still sitting on my coffee table, the delicate china that had served my family for generations. Something about the afternoon felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. By evening, I would understand exactly what had been wrong with that tea, and why Victoria had been so eager to watch me drink every drop. I woke up Friday morning feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My joints ached in ways they never had before, and there was a persistent nausea that made the thought of my usual coffee and toast utterly repulsive. At first, I attributed it to stress. The conversation with Victoria and Benjamin had left me unsettled, and I'd always been sensitive to emotional upheaval. But as I struggled to get out of bed, my legs felt weak and unsteady. The room seemed to tilt slightly when I stood up, and I had to grip the bedpost for support. This wasn't stress. This was something else entirely. I made my way downstairs carefully, holding the banister with both hands. Each step required concentration, as if my body had forgotten how to perform this simple, automatic function. In the kitchen, I attempted to make tea, my usual morning ritual, but the smell of the bergamot made my stomach lurch violently. The phone rang just as I was contemplating whether I should call my doctor. Victoria's name appeared on the caller ID, and something cold settled in my chest. I almost didn't answer, but some ingrained sense of politeness made me pick up. "Eleanor, how are you feeling this morning?" Her voice was bright, almost cheerful, but there was something underneath it that I couldn't quite identify. "Actually, I'm not feeling very well," I admitted, sinking into my kitchen chair. "I think I might be coming down with something." "Oh no, that's terrible! What kind of symptoms are you having?" The concern in her voice sounded genuine, but why did it feel rehearsed? Nausea, weakness, joint pain, it came on quite suddenly. "That sounds serious, Eleanor. Maybe you should see a doctor, or—" She paused, and I could practically hear the gears turning. "Maybe this is exactly what Benjamin and I were talking about yesterday. What if you'd been alone when this hit? What if you couldn't get to the phone?" Even through the fog of illness, I recognized the manipulation. "Victoria, I'm perfectly capable of calling for help if I need it." "But are you? You sound so weak right now. I'm really worried about you." I closed my eyes, fighting another wave of nausea. "I just need some rest. I'm sure I'll feel better in a day or two." "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you're being stubborn. This could be a warning sign that your body is telling you something. Maybe the stress of living alone, maintaining that big house, is finally catching up with you." The audacity of it took my breath away. I'd been perfectly healthy until yesterday, and now she was using a sudden illness as evidence that I couldn't live independently? "I've been managing just fine for 4 years, Victoria." "Have you, though? Really? I've noticed things lately. You repeat stories. You seem confused sometimes. You move more slowly than you used to. And now this sudden illness." She let the implication hang in the air. "I am not confused," I said firmly, though even as I spoke, I wondered if I was being entirely honest. The past 12 hours felt hazy, disconnected. But that was because I was sick, not because I was losing my mental faculties. "Of course not, Eleanor. I didn't mean to imply that. I'm just saying that maybe your body is telling you it's time to accept some help." The folks at Sunset Manor deal with health issues like this all the time. They have medical staff on site 24 hours a day. I gripped the phone tighter, anger cutting through the physical discomfort. So now you're diagnosing me over the phone? Yesterday I was fine, and today I need round-the-clock medical care? I'm not diagnosing anything, I'm just observing patterns. Her voice had grown cooler, more clinical. Benjamin is worried sick about you, we both are, when he heard how you sounded this morning. Benjamin heard how I sounded? When did you talk to him about me? A brief pause. He called to check on you, of course. When I told him you were feeling unwell, he was very concerned. In fact, he thinks we should come over this afternoon to check on you. Something about this entire conversation felt orchestrated, as if Victoria had been planning exactly what to say. That's not necessary. I'm quite capable of taking care of myself when I'm sick. Are you, though? What if you fall down those stairs? What if you pass out and hit your head? Eleanor, you're being unreasonable. The word unreasonable hit me like a slap. Theodore had never called me unreasonable, not once in 52 years of marriage. He'd valued my independence, my judgment, my ability to make my own decisions. And here was this woman, who'd known me for barely 3 years, telling me that wanting to recover from an illness in my own home was unreasonable. Victoria, I appreciate your concern, but I need to get off the phone now. I'm going to rest. Wait, Eleanor. Before you go, have you given any more thought to Sunset Manor? Because if you're having health issues, the timing might actually be perfect. They could evaluate you, make sure you're getting proper care. I said I need time to think about it. But the deadline is Monday. That's only 3 days away. And if you're sick, you might not be thinking clearly enough to make such an important decision. There it was, the implication that illness had somehow compromised my mental capacity. My mind is perfectly clear, Victoria. And right now, it's clear that I want to stay in my own home. That's the illness talking, Eleanor. When you're feeling better, you'll see that we're only trying to help. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen trembling with a combination of illness and rage. The presumption of it, that a stomach bug somehow invalidated my ability to make decisions about my own life. That temporary physical weakness meant I needed to be institutionalized. But as the morning wore on, I began to wonder if Victoria might have a point about one thing. This illness was unusually severe and had come on very suddenly. I'd always been healthy, rarely even catching common colds. For me to be this sick, this quickly, was unusual. I tried to eat some toast around noon, but it came right back up. The nausea was accompanied by a burning sensation in my throat and a persistent metallic taste that reminded me of sucking on pennies as a child. My hands were trembling so badly that I could barely hold a glass of water. By 2 o'clock I was genuinely frightened. This wasn't a normal illness. Something was seriously wrong. I called my doctor's office, but they were booked solid and couldn't see me until the following week. The nurse suggested I go to urgent care if I was really concerned, but the thought of driving in my current condition seemed impossible. That's when Benjamin called. Mom, Victoria told me you're feeling really sick. I'm coming over right now. Benjamin, you don't need to. Yes, I do. You sound terrible. I'll be there in 20 minutes. When he arrived, the worry on his face was genuine and heartbreaking. My son had always been attentive, but seeing him this concerned made me wonder if I looked worse than I thought. Mom, you look awful. When did this start? Yesterday evening, after you and Victoria left. It's gotten progressively worse. He felt my forehead with the back of his hand, the same gesture I'd used on him countless times when he was sick as a child. You don't feel feverish, but you're very pale, and you're shaking. I know it looks bad, but it's probably just a stomach virus. These things have to run their course. Benjamin sat down beside me, taking my hands in his. Mom, I need you to really listen to me. Victoria and I have been talking, and we think this might be a sign that you need more support than you're getting. Even sick as I was, I could hear Victoria's words coming out of his mouth. Benjamin, I was perfectly fine until yesterday. One illness doesn't mean I can't live independently. But what if it's not just one illness? What if this is your body telling you that the stress of maintaining this house, living alone, is too much? I pulled my hands away from his. Whose idea was that? Yours or Victoria's? He looked uncomfortable. It doesn't matter whose idea it was. What matters is that you're sick and alone, and if I hadn't come over, you might have gotten sicker with no one to help you. I would have called for help if I needed it. Would you, though? You're stubborn, Mom. You always have been. Sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes it's dangerous. The conversation continued for another hour, with Benjamin growing more insistent that I at least visit Sunset Manor, just to see what they offered. He painted pictures of on-site medical care, nutritious meals I wouldn't have to prepare myself, social activities that would keep my mind sharp. But underneath his concern, I could hear Victoria's arguments. The same phrases, the same emotional manipulation, just delivered by someone I trusted completely. I'm not ready to make that decision, I finally said, especially not while I'm sick. But Mom, the deadline is artificial, Benjamin. If Sunset Manor is such a wonderful place, there will be other openings. And if there aren't, then maybe it's not meant to be. As he prepared to leave, Benjamin hugged me carefully, as if I might break. Promise me you'll call if you feel worse. And promise me you'll think about what we discussed. I promise I'll call if I need help. As for the other thing, I've already given you my answer. After he left, I dragged myself upstairs to bed, exhausted by the effort of defending my right to make my own decisions. But as I lay there, feeling my body betray me in ways it never had before, a terrible thought began to take shape. This wasn't a normal illness, and the timing, right after that strange-tasting tea, felt like more than a coincidence. But surely I was being paranoid. Surely no one, especially not family, would actually hurt me. Would they? Saturday morning brought no relief from the mysterious illness that had been plaguing me for 2 days. If anything, I felt worse. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, with a grayish tint to my skin that I'd never seen before. My hair, usually meticulously styled, hung limp and lifeless around my face. But it was the tremor in my hands that finally convinced me I needed help. Not medical help. Not yet. But the kind of help that came from talking to someone who knew me well enough to tell me if I was losing my mind. I called Ruby Henderson. Ruby had been my closest friend for over 30 years, ever since our children had played together in the same sandbox at Willowbrook Elementary. She was a retired nurse, sharp as a tack at 73, and had the kind of no-nonsense personality that cut through pretense like a hot knife through butter. If anyone could help me sort through the confusion and fear that had been building since Thursday afternoon, it would be Ruby. Eleanor? You sound terrible, honey. What's wrong? Just hearing her familiar voice brought tears to my eyes. Ruby, I need to talk to someone, and I don't know who else to trust right now. I'll be right over. No, not here. Could we meet somewhere? Maybe Romano's? I need to get out of this house for a while. There was a pause. Ruby knew me well enough to understand that if I was asking to meet somewhere public rather than inviting her to my home, something was seriously wrong. Of course. Give me an hour to get ready and I'll meet you there. The drive to Romano's Italian restaurant took every ounce of concentration I possessed. My vision seemed slightly blurred, and I had to grip the steering wheel to keep my hands from shaking. Twice I considered turning around and going home, but the thought of spending another day alone with my fears kept me moving forward. Ruby was already seated in our usual corner booth when I arrived, her silver hair perfectly coiffed and her blue eyes sharp with concern. She took one look at me and immediately stood up. Good Lord, Eleanor, you look like death warmed over. When did you last eat a real meal? I can't keep anything down, I admitted, sliding into the booth across from her. Everything tastes metallic, and my stomach just rebels against food. Ruby's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. She reached across the table and pressed the back of her hand to my forehead, then lifted my chin to examine my face more closely. "How long have you been sick like this?" "Since Thursday evening. It came on suddenly, right after Benjamin and Victoria visited." Ruby's expression sharpened. What did they want? I told her everything. The pressure to move to Sunset Manor, the rushed timeline, Victoria's increasingly aggressive suggestions about my inability to live independently. Ruby listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each detail. "And you said this illness started right after they left?" "Yes, but Ruby, I'm probably being paranoid. People get sick all the time. It's probably just coincidence." Ruby was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm I recognized from our decades of friendship. It meant she was thinking hard about something unpleasant. "Eleanor, in my 40 years of nursing, I learned to trust patterns. And what you're describing, the sudden onset, the specific symptoms, the timing, it doesn't feel like a coincidence to me." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if one of my patients had presented with these symptoms under these circumstances, I would have asked some very pointed questions about what they'd consumed recently." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You think someone poisoned me?" "I think someone who wanted you incapacitated and compliant might have given you something to make you sick enough to doubt your own judgment." We sat in silence for several minutes while I processed this possibility. The idea that Victoria, or worse, Benjamin, might have deliberately made me ill seemed so monstrous that my mind rejected it instinctively. "But that's impossible," I said finally. "They're family." Ruby's expression was gentle but firm. "Honey, some of the worst abuse I've seen in my career came from family members. Financial elder abuse is more common than you might think, especially when there's inheritance money involved." "But I'm not wealthy? Aren't you? You own that beautiful house outright, don't you? And Theodore was careful with money. I'd bet you have a comfortable nest egg saved up." She was right, of course. Theodore's life insurance, combined with our savings and the value of our home, meant I was worth close to $800,000. Not rich by some standards, but certainly enough to motivate someone with expensive tastes and mounting debts. "Even if that were true," I said, "how would making me sick help them get my money?" Ruby leaned forward, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. "Think about it, Eleanor. If you're declared mentally incompetent or physically unable to care for yourself, who do you think would be appointed as your guardian or power of attorney?" The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Benjamin was my only child, my closest relative. If I were deemed unable to make my own decisions, he would naturally become responsible for my care and my finances. And if Benjamin was being influenced by Victoria, you think they're trying to have me declared incompetent? I think they're trying to create a situation where moving you to assisted living seems like the only reasonable option. Once you're there, once you're isolated from your support system and dependent on others for everything, it becomes much easier to control your decisions about money. The server approached our table, but Ruby waved her away with a gesture that brooked no argument. She pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my blood run cold. "I did some research after you called. Sunset Manor isn't just an assisted living facility, Eleanor. It's specifically designed for people with memory care issues and diminished capacity. The average stay is less than 2 years, and the monthly fees are astronomical." I stared at the website she'd pulled up. The monthly cost was nearly $6,000, enough to deplete my savings within a decade, assuming I lived that long. And the photos that had looked so appealing when Victoria showed them to me now seemed sterile and institutional. But surely Benjamin wouldn't. I couldn't finish the sentence. Maybe Benjamin doesn't know what Victoria is really planning. Maybe he genuinely believes you need help and she's just taking advantage of his concern. Or maybe... She paused, clearly reluctant to voice the alternative. "Maybe what?" "Maybe he's more involved than you want to believe." The thought was too painful to contemplate directly, but I forced myself to examine the evidence objectively. Benjamin's sudden urgency about my living situation. His willingness to accept Victoria's assessment of my capabilities. The way he'd echoed her concerns word for word, as if he'd been coached. What should I do? Ruby reached across the table and squeezed my hand. First, you need to see a doctor immediately. If someone has been poisoning you, we need to document it. Blood tests, urine tests, whatever it takes to prove what's been done to you. And if the tests show something, then we call the police. The word police hung between us like a thunderclap. The idea of involving law enforcement in what I'd thought was a family disagreement seemed surreal. But Ruby was right. If someone had deliberately poisoned me to make me appear incompetent, that wasn't a family disagreement. It was a crime. There's something else you need to consider, Ruby continued. If I'm right about what's happening, Thursday's tea might not be the end of it. If they're desperate enough to poison you once, they might try again. The implication chilled me to the bone. You think I'm in danger? I think you're a 71-year-old woman with a substantial estate and no other family besides a son who may or may not be under the influence of a woman who seems very interested in your money. Yes, Eleanor, I think you could be in danger. As we sat in that familiar restaurant where Theodore and I had celebrated so many anniversaries, where I'd shared countless meals with friends and family, the world suddenly felt like a much more dangerous place. The people I'd trusted most might be the very ones plotting against me. What's my first step? I asked. Ruby was already pulling out her phone. I'm calling Dr. Patricia Williams at Willowbrook Medical. She's a friend of mine and she understands elder abuse. She'll see you today, run the necessary tests, and if we find what I think we're going to find, she'll know exactly what to do next. Within an hour, I had an appointment for that afternoon. As Ruby drove me home to get my insurance cards and medication list, I felt the first glimmer of hope I'd experienced since Thursday. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't suddenly becoming incompetent or unable to care for myself. Someone had been systematically undermining my health and my confidence. But now I had an ally who understood what was happening. The question was, would we be able to prove it before they tried again? As Ruby helped me into her car for the drive to the medical center, I caught a glimpse of a familiar silver BMW parked across the street from my house. Benjamin and Victoria, watching and waiting. The game, whatever it was far from over. Dr. Patricia Williams was everything Ruby had promised, sharp, no nonsense, and immediately suspicious when she heard my symptoms combined with the family pressure I'd been experiencing. At 65, she had the kind of weathered competence that came from decades of emergency medicine, and her examination was thorough, in ways that made me feel like someone was finally taking my condition seriously. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to be direct with you, she said after completing her initial assessment. Your symptoms are consistent with heavy metal poisoning, specifically arsenic. The metallic taste, the gastrointestinal distress, the tremors. These aren't typical of a stomach virus. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though Ruby had prepared me for this possibility. Hearing it from a medical professional made it terrifyingly real. How can you be sure? I can't be completely certain without laboratory confirmation, but I've seen cases like this before. Unfortunately, elder poisoning is more common than most people realize. She was already preparing vials for blood draws. We're going to run a complete heavy metals panel, and I'm also ordering tests for other common toxins. The results will take 24 to 48 hours. As the phlebotomist drew what seemed like an enormous amount of blood, Dr. Williams continued her questioning. Can you think of anything unusual you consumed in the days before your symptoms started? Any food or drink that tasted different than normal? I told her about the tea on Thursday afternoon, how it had tasted slightly off, but I'd attributed it to stress affecting my taste buds. Victoria, my daughter-in-law, she served it to me from my own tea service. She even refilled my cup when I hesitated to finish it. Dr. Williams made careful notes. Did anyone else drink from the same pot? Benjamin had coffee that he brought with him. Victoria barely touched her tea. The memory was becoming clearer now that I was focusing on the details. She kept watching to make sure I was drinking mine. I need to ask you some difficult questions about your family relationships and your financial situation, Dr. Williams said gently. In cases like this, there's usually a motive. I explained about the pressure to move to Sunset Manor, the rush timeline, Victoria's increasing comments about my competence. Dr. Williams nodded grimly, clearly recognizing a familiar pattern. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to strongly recommend that you not return to your home alone until we have these test results. Do you have somewhere safe you can stay? The reality of my situation hit me fully for the first time. I was essentially homeless, driven from my own house by the fear that my family might be trying to kill me. Ruby, my friend who brought me here, she has a guest room. Good. And I want you to promise me that you won't eat or drink anything that hasn't been prepared by Ruby or purchased directly by you from a sealed container. Nothing that anyone in your family has had access to. After leaving the medical center, Ruby drove me to the police station. Detective Marcus Torres was a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent years dealing with family crises. But I could see his expression grow more serious as we explained what had happened. The problem we're going to face, he said after taking my statement, is that we need concrete evidence. Even if the blood tests come back positive for arsenic, proving who administered it and when is going to be challenging. What about the tea service? Ruby asked. If they used Eleanor's own dishes, there might be residue. Detective Torres nodded. We'd need a search warrant for that, and we'd need more than suspicion to get one. But if the blood work comes back positive, that would give us probable cause. He explained the process. If the tests confirmed poisoning, they would open a formal investigation. They could then search my house for evidence, interview Benjamin and Victoria, and potentially press charges depending on what they found. In the meantime, he said, I agree with Dr. Williams. You shouldn't be alone, and you definitely shouldn't be in your house. These situations can escalate quickly if the perpetrators realize they're being investigated. Ruby took me home with her, and for the first time in 3 days, I felt safe enough to actually sleep. Her guest room was small but cozy, with soft blue walls and photographs of her grandchildren on the dresser. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, I thought about how drastically my life had changed in less than a week. Sunday brought an unexpected development. Benjamin called Ruby's house, somehow having figured out where I was staying. Mom, what's going on? I went by your house this morning and you weren't there. Mrs. Patterson said she saw you leaving with Ruby yesterday and you haven't been back. Ruby handed me the phone with a questioning look. I nodded. I needed to hear what Benjamin had to say. I'm staying with Ruby for a few days, I said carefully. Why? Are you feeling worse? Did something happen? His concern sounded genuine, which made this conversation even more painful. I've been to see a doctor. I'm having some tests done. What kind of tests? Mom, you're scaring me. Is it serious? I found myself studying his voice for any hint of deception, any sign that he knew more than he was letting on. The doctor thinks my illness might not be natural. A long pause. What do you mean, not natural? She thinks I might have been poisoned. The silence that followed was deafening. When Benjamin finally spoke, his voice was shaky. Poisoned? That's impossible. Who would poison you? I don't know, Benjamin. That's what the police are going to help me figure out. The police? Mom, you called the police? Now he sounded panicked. Why would you do that without talking to me first? Because I don't know who I can trust right now. Another long pause. You don't trust me? The pain in his voice was either genuine or perfectly performed. I don't know, Benjamin. I hope I can trust you. But someone put arsenic in my tea on Thursday, and you and Victoria were the only people in my house that day. Arsenic? Mom, You really think Victoria or I would try to hurt you? I think someone who wants me in assisted living might see making me appear sick and incompetent as a solution to their problem. When Benjamin spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more controlled. I'm coming over to Ruby's. We need to talk about this face to face. No, I said quickly. I don't want to see you until the test results come back. Mom, you're being manipulated by people who don't understand our family situation. Ruby doesn't know Victoria like I do. Victoria would never hurt anyone. Then you won't mind if the police investigate and prove that. After I hung up, Ruby and I sat in her kitchen trying to process the conversation. How did he sound to you? She asked. Shocked, but I can't tell if he was shocked because it's true or because I found out. 20 minutes later, Victoria called. Eleanor, Benjamin told me about your accusations. I have to say, I'm deeply hurt that you would think I'm capable of such a thing. Her voice was perfectly modulated, concerned but not hysterical, wounded but not angry. It was the kind of response that could be interpreted as either innocent outrage or careful damage control. If you're innocent, then the investigation will prove that, I said. Investigation? Eleanor, do you understand what you're doing? You're destroying this family over a stomach virus and some paranoid theories. The doctor doesn't think it was a stomach virus. Doctors can be wrong. And even if you were somehow exposed to something toxic, there are a dozen ways that could have happened. Maybe it was something in your garden fertilizer, or old paint in your house, or contaminated water pipes. She was prepared for this conversation, I realized. She had alternative explanations ready, reasonable doubt lined up like soldiers. This wasn't the reaction of someone hearing shocking news for the first time. Victoria, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you put anything in my tea on Thursday? Of course not. Eleanor, I'm going to chalk this up to your illness affecting your judgment, because the woman I know would never make such horrible accusations against her family. After she hung up, I felt more confused than ever. Both Benjamin and Victoria had sounded believable, their shock and hurt seeming genuine. Was I being paranoid? Was Ruby's nursing background making her see sinister patterns where none existed? But then I remembered Dr. Williams' certainty about my symptoms, the specific way Victoria had watched me drink that tea, the rushed timeline for Sunset Manor that conveniently coincided with my sudden illness. Monday afternoon, Dr. Williams called with the test results. Eleanor, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your blood shows significant levels of arsenic, enough to cause your symptoms and enough to be life-threatening if exposure had continued. This wasn't accidental contamination. Someone deliberately poisoned you. The confirmation hit me like a sledgehammer. Someone I trusted, someone who sat in my living room and called me family, had tried to kill me. What happens now? I asked. Now we call Detective Torres, and you decide how far you want to pursue this. Eleanor, whoever did this to you came very close to succeeding. If you hadn't gotten medical attention when you did, if you'd consumed more of whatever they gave you, you might not have survived. As I hung up the phone, Ruby put her arm around my shoulders. I'm so sorry I was right, she said quietly. What do I do now? How do I face my son, knowing that either he tried to kill me or his wife did and he doesn't know it? You survive, Ruby said firmly. You get justice. And you make sure this never happens to anyone else. But even as I dialed Detective Torres's number to report the positive test results, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. The blood work might prove I was poisoned, but it wouldn't tell us who had done it. And it wouldn't prepare me for the war that was about to begin. Detective Torres called Tuesday morning with news that changed everything. Mrs. Whitfield, we've obtained a search warrant for your home. The positive arsenic results were enough to convince the judge. We're executing it this afternoon, and I wanted to give you the option to be present. The thought of watching strangers search through my most personal belongings was almost unbearable, but I knew I needed to be there. What exactly will you be looking for? Primarily, we're focused on your kitchen and any areas where food or beverages might have been prepared or stored. We're bringing in a forensics team to test your tea service, check for any containers that might have held arsenic, and dust for fingerprints on relevant items. Ruby drove me to my house at 2 o'clock, where we found a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. My neighbors, drawn by the police cars and official activity, watched with the kind of horrified fascination that accompanied any drama in our quiet suburban neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson waved tentatively from her front porch, her face creased with worry. The search was methodical and intrusive. Officers in latex gloves carefully bagged my entire tea service, the delicate rose-patterned china that had been my mother's, now evidence in an attempted murder case. They swabbed my kitchen counters, tested residue from my sink drain, and photographed everything from multiple angles. Detective Torres found me standing in my living room, watching strangers dismantle my peaceful life piece by piece. "This is never easy," he said gently. "But if we find what we're looking for, it could give us exactly what we need to press charges. What are the chances you'll find anything? It's been 5 days since Thursday. You'd be surprised how much evidence people leave behind, especially when they're not expecting to be caught. Arsenic is persistent. It doesn't just disappear. And if whoever did this was careless about cleaning up." That's when Benjamin arrived. I heard his car door slam in the driveway, followed by rapid footsteps on my front porch. When he burst through the front door, his face was flushed with what looked like genuine panic. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, staring at the police officers methodically working through my kitchen. "Mom, why are there cops searching your house?" Detective Torres stepped forward, his badge clearly visible. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm Detective Torres. We're executing a search warrant in connection with the alleged poisoning of your mother." Benjamin's face went white. "Poisoning? I thought... Mom said something about tests, but I didn't think..." He looked around wildly, as if trying to process what he was seeing. "This is really happening? Someone actually poisoned her?" His shock seemed genuine, but I'd learned not to trust my instincts about my own family. "The blood tests came back positive for arsenic, Benjamin. Someone put it in my tea on Thursday." "Arsenic?" He sank into my armchair, the same one Theodore used to read in every evening. That's attempted murder." "Yes, it is," Detective Torres said simply. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm going to need to ask you some questions. Would you prefer to do that here or at the station?" "Here is fine. I have nothing to hide." Benjamin's voice was shaky but determined. "Ask me whatever you need to ask." The questioning lasted nearly an hour. Detective Torres was thorough, but not aggressive, establishing a timeline of Thursday's visit, asking about Benjamin's knowledge of arsenic or other poisons, probing for financial motives or family tensions. Benjamin answered everything directly, maintaining that he'd had no idea anyone wanted to hurt me, that the suggestion about Sunset Manor had been driven by genuine concern for my well-being, and that he couldn't imagine Victoria being capable of violence. "Where is your wife today, Mr. Whitfield?" Detective Torres asked. "At work. She's a marketing consultant. She has her own firm." "Why?" "We'll need to speak with her as well. Can you provide us with her office address?" Benjamin gave them the information, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. For the first time, he was being forced to consider the possibility that his wife might have tried to kill his mother. After Detective Torres finished with Benjamin, my son approached me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I swear to you, I had no idea. If Victoria did this, if she actually tried to hurt you..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Benjamin, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Have you and Victoria been having financial problems?" He looked away, which was answer enough. "Some, nothing serious. Just some credit card debt, a few late payments. Victoria likes nice things, and her business has been slow lately." "How much debt?" "I don't know exactly. Victoria handles most of our finances." He paused, clearly wrestling with whether to say more. "Maybe $60,000–$70,000. But Mom, that's not enough to..." I mean, people don't kill over credit card debt. They might if they thought they could inherit enough money to solve all their problems. The implication hung in the air between us. Benjamin stared at me with a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. You think Victoria poisoned you to get your inheritance? I think Victoria has been very interested in my living situation, my financial independence, and my decision-making capacity. And I think the timing of my illness was awfully convenient for someone who wanted me in assisted living. Before Benjamin could respond, his phone rang. Victoria's name appeared on the screen, and we all froze. Detective Torres nodded for him to answer it. "Hi, honey," Benjamin said, his voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, I'm at Mom's house. There are police here." I could hear Victoria's voice through the phone, sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. "They found arsenic in Mom's blood," Benjamin continued. "They're searching the house for evidence." More urgent talking from Victoria, her voice rising in pitch. "No, I can't leave right now. They want to talk to you too. Where are you?" A longer exchange, and then Benjamin's face changed. "What do you mean, you're not at the office? I gave them your office address 20 minutes ago." Detective Torres was already reaching for his radio. Something in Benjamin's expression told me that Victoria wasn't where she was supposed to be. "Victoria, where are you right now?" Benjamin's voice had grown harder. "Why aren't you at work?" The conversation continued for another minute, with Benjamin growing more agitated and confused. Finally, he hung up and looked at Detective Torres with obvious distress. "She says she's been homesick today, but she sounded like she was in a car. And when I asked her about coming here to talk to you, she said she had to run some errands first." "What kind of errands?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. "She didn't say, but Mom," Benjamin's voice was barely a whisper. "She asked if they'd found anything yet. She asked specifically about the tea set." Detective Torres was already on his radio, calling for units to locate Victoria's car. "Mr. Whitfield, what does your wife drive?" "A white Mercedes sedan, license plate VMA 4071. As police officers throughout Willowbrook began searching for Victoria, I felt a mixture of vindication and heartbreak. My suspicions were being confirmed, but at the cost of my son's marriage and my family's complete destruction. "Benjamin," I said gently, "I need you to think very carefully. Has Victoria ever mentioned wanting to hurt me? Has she said anything about wishing I weren't around? Or about what would happen if something happened to me?" He was quiet for a long time, clearly struggling with memories he'd probably dismissed or rationalized. "She's made comments," he said finally, "about how much easier things would be if you were in assisted living, about how the house was too much for you to handle. And once, when we were having money problems, she said something about how it wasn't fair that you were sitting on all that wealth while we were struggling." "When was this?" "A few months ago. But Mom, lots of people say things like that when they're stressed. It doesn't mean they'd actually attempt murder?" The words hung in the air like an accusation. My son looked at me with eyes full of pain and growing certainty. "I think I need to call a lawyer," he said quietly. 20 minutes later, Detective Torres received a call that chilled us all. Victoria's Mercedes had been found in the parking lot of Hartford International Airport. Her purse was in the car, but Victoria was gone. She was running, which meant she knew the net was closing in, and that meant she was almost certainly guilty. But it also meant that she was desperate, and desperate people were capable of anything. "Mrs. Whitfield," Detective Torres said, "I think you're going to need to stay away from your home a while longer. If Mrs. Ashford is running, she might try to destroy evidence, or she might come back to finish what she started." As we left my house under police escort, I realized that Victoria's disappearance had answered one question, but raised a dozen others. She was guilty. Her flight proved that much. But was she acting alone, or was Benjamin more involved than he was letting on? And most importantly, what would she do now that her carefully planned crime was unraveling? The game of cat and mouse was just beginning, and I was no longer sure who was the hunter and who was the prey. The call came at 6 in the morning, Wednesday. Detective Torres's voice was grim and urgent. "Mrs. Whitfield, we need to talk. Victoria's back in town, and she's been busy." Ruby and I met him at the police station an hour later, where he laid out a series of photographs that made my blood run cold. Security camera footage from various locations around Willowbrook showed Victoria at a hardware store, a pharmacy, and a garden center, all on Tuesday afternoon after her car had been found at the airport. "She took a taxi back from Hartford," Detective Torres explained, "paid cash, used a fake name. She's been purchasing supplies, and based on what we can see here, she's not planning to turn herself in quietly." The pharmacy footage showed Victoria buying hydrogen peroxide, bandages, and what appeared to be hair dye. At the hardware store, she'd purchased duct tape, rope, and a utility knife. The garden center purchase was the most chilling, a large container of concentrated plant fertilizer that contained high levels of potassium nitrate. "What does this mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "It means she's planning something more direct than poisoning your tea," Detective Torres said bluntly. "These purchases suggest she's preparing for a confrontation. The fertilizer can be used to make explosives, and the other items." He gestured toward the rope and knife. "Well, they speak for themselves." Ruby gripped my hand tightly. "She's going to try to kill Eleanor outright this time. That's what we have to assume. Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to be very direct with you. Based on Victoria's behavior and purchases, we believe she's planning to abduct you, possibly torture you into signing legal documents transferring your assets, and then kill you in a way that looks like an accident or suicide." The clinical way he laid out Victoria's probable plan was almost worse than the plan itself. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of desperate weakness. This was premeditated, calculated murder with financial gain as the motive. "What can we do?" I asked. "First, we're putting you in protective custody. Not in a jail, but in a safe house with round-the-clock police protection. Second, we're setting up surveillance on your home, Benjamin's house, and any other locations Victoria might target. And third," he paused, looking uncomfortable, "we'd like you to consider helping us catch her." "What do you mean?" "We want to use you as bait." The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of phones ringing in other offices. Ruby was shaking her head before Detective Torres had finished speaking. "Absolutely not," Ruby said firmly. "You are not using a 71-year-old woman as bait for a murderer. Mrs. Henderson, I understand your concern, but Victoria has already proven she's willing to kill Eleanor. If we don't catch her soon, she's going to try again, and next time we might not be able to stop her in time." Detective Torres outlined their plan. They would stage my return to my house, with unmarked police cars positioned throughout the neighborhood and officers hidden inside the home. When Victoria made her move, they would arrest her. "The risk is minimal," he insisted. "You'd be wearing a wire, and we'd have sharpshooters positioned to ensure your safety at all times." "The risk is Eleanor's life," Ruby countered. "What if something goes wrong? What if Victoria is armed? What if she's more dangerous than you're anticipating?" I listened to them argue while studying the security footage of Victoria systematically purchasing the tools of my destruction. In one image taken at the garden center, she was actually smiling as she paid for the fertilizer. The casual evil of it was breathtaking. "I'll do it," I said quietly. Both Ruby and Detective Torres stopped arguing and stared at me. "Eleanor, no," Ruby said immediately. "This is insane." "Ruby, she's going to keep trying until she succeeds. And every day she's out there, she's becoming more desperate and more dangerous. If the police can catch her while she's focused on me, at least she won't be able to hurt anyone else." "Mrs. Whitfield," Detective Torres said carefully, "I want you to understand exactly what you'd be agreeing to. Victoria has already demonstrated that she's capable of violence. If she realizes this is a trap, she might try to kill you immediately, rather than follow whatever plan she's developed." And if I don't help you catch her, she'll definitely try to kill me eventually. At least this way I have protection. We spent the next 3 hours planning every detail. I would return to my house Thursday evening, making sure to be visible through the windows. Police officers would be stationed in my basement, in Ruby's house next door, and in unmarked vehicles throughout the neighborhood. I would wear a wire and a panic button, and at the first sign of real danger, the operation would be terminated. Benjamin arrived at the police station just as we were finalizing the arrangements. Detective Torres had called him in to explain the situation and to assess whether he might still be involved in Victoria's plans. "You want to use my mother as bait to catch my wife?" Benjamin's voice was hoarse with disbelief. "Have you all lost your minds?" "Benjamin," I said gently, "Victoria is planning to kill me anyway. This is the only way to stop her before she succeeds." "Then let the police find her another way. Set up roadblocks, check hotels, do whatever cops do to catch fugitives. Don't put yourself in danger." Detective Torres showed Benjamin the security footage of Victoria's purchases. I watched my son's face as the reality of his wife's intentions sank in. The rope, the knife, the fertilizer. Each item was another nail in the coffin of whatever love or loyalty he'd felt for Victoria. "She's really going to try to kill you," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, she is." "And you're going to let her get close enough to try?" "I'm going to let her get close enough to be arrested." Benjamin was quiet for a long time, staring at the photographs as if they might change if he looked at them hard enough. "What do you need from me?" "We need you to act normally," Detective Torres said. "Go to work, come home at your usual time, don't do anything that might tip Victoria off that we're planning a trap. And if she contacts you, we need you to report it immediately." "What if she asks me to help her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Detective Torres leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mr. Whitfield, your wife has attempted to murder your mother once and is planning to try again. If she asks for your help, you need to decide whether you're going to be an accessory to attempted murder or whether you're going to help us stop her." "That's not a fair question," Benjamin said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Actually, it's the only question that matters right now," I said. "Benjamin, I need to know whose side you're on." My son looked at me with eyes full of pain and confusion. "I'm on your side, Mom. I've always been on your side. I just never imagined it would come to this." That afternoon, while Detective Torres coordinated with the surveillance teams, I met privately with my lawyer, Harrison Blake. I'd called him Tuesday evening to update my will and make sure my affairs were in order, just in case something went wrong with the police operation. "Eleanor, are you absolutely certain about this plan?" Harrison asked as he notarized the updated documents. "There are other ways to handle the situation." "Such as?" "You could leave town until they catch her. Go stay with relatives in another state. Maybe take an extended vacation somewhere Victoria wouldn't think to look for you." I considered this option, which Detective Torres had also suggested. It would be safer, certainly, but it would also mean living in fear for weeks or months while Victoria remained free. And there was no guarantee that she wouldn't eventually track me down or decide to target someone else I cared about. "No," I said firmly, "this ends tomorrow night." Harrison updated my will to ensure that Victoria would receive nothing if something happened to me, and that Benjamin's inheritance would be held in trust if he was found to be involved in any way with the attempts on my life. I also created a new power of attorney document naming Ruby as my healthcare proxy, removing Benjamin from that role until the investigation was complete. "You're being smart about this," Harrison said as he sealed the documents in his office safe. "But, Eleanor, I hope you're also being careful." That evening I had dinner with Ruby at her kitchen table, possibly for the last time. We didn't talk much about the operation planned for the next day. Instead, we reminisced about our children when they were young, about our husbands when they were alive, about the simpler times when the biggest worry was whether it would rain on the church picnic. "Promise me something," Ruby said as we cleaned up the dishes. "Promise me that if anything feels wrong tomorrow night, if you have even the slightest doubt about your safety, you'll press that panic button immediately." I promise. And promise me that you'll remember that you have people who love you and want you safe. Don't try to be a hero, Eleanor. Just survive." As I prepared for bed in Ruby's guest room, I thought about the strange turns my life had taken in the past week. 7 days ago, I'd been a simple widow tending her garden and worrying about her roses. Now I was preparing to risk my life to catch a daughter-in-law who'd tried to poison me. But I wasn't afraid. For the first time since Theodore's death, I felt like I had a purpose that mattered. Tomorrow night, I would either help put a dangerous person behind bars, or I would die trying. Either way, Victoria would never again have the power to make me feel helpless or afraid. The game was about to end, one way or another. Thursday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill that made me grateful for the heavy sweater I'd chosen to wear. At 7 o'clock, Detective Torres escorted me back to my house for the first time since the search warrant had been executed. The familiar sight of my front porch and the oak tree Theodore had planted decades ago should have been comforting, but instead, everything felt ominous and foreign. "Remember," Detective Torres said as he fitted the wire beneath my sweater, "act as naturally as possible. Turn on lights, make tea, do whatever you would normally do on a Thursday evening. We need Victoria to believe you're genuinely alone and vulnerable." The panic button was disguised as a pendant on a chain around my neck, small enough to be hidden but large enough for me to find quickly if needed. "Press this if you feel any immediate danger," Officer Martinez explained. "Don't worry about whether you're overreacting. If something feels wrong, signal us immediately." Inside my house, 2 officers were positioned in the basement with a direct view of the backyard through small windows. Detective Torres would be monitoring everything from Ruby's house next door, where additional officers were stationed. 3 unmarked cars were parked strategically throughout the neighborhood, their occupants watching for any sign of Victoria's approach. "The operation begins now," Detective Torres said through my earpiece as I unlocked my front door. "Act normal, Mrs. Whitfield. We're watching everything." I entered my house with trembling hands, immediately struck by how different it felt, knowing that strangers had searched through every room, that evidence bags had been filled with my most personal belongings. The living room where Victoria had served me poisoned tea looked like a crime scene, which I supposed it was. I followed the plan we'd discussed, turning on lights in each room to signal that I was home and moving around normally. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on for tea, ironic given what tea had cost me a week ago, and tried to behave as though I wasn't wearing a wire or expecting a murderer to appear at any moment. The waiting was the hardest part. Every sound, the house settling, the refrigerator cycling on, cars passing on the street, made my pulse spike. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, picking up a book but unable to focus on the words. The officers had warned me that Victoria might not come tonight, that she might watch the house for days before making her move. The thought of enduring this tension repeatedly was almost unbearable. At 9:15, Detective Torres's voice crackled through my earpiece. "We have movement. White sedan approaching from the north. Driver appears to match the suspect's description." My hands began shaking so violently that I had to set down my teacup. This was really happening. Victoria was coming. "Vehicle has passed the house without stopping," came the update a minute later, continuing surveillance. For the next hour, false alarms came regularly. Cars that slowed down but didn't stop. Shadows that moved in ways that suggested human presence but turned out to be neighborhood cats or swaying branches. Each time, my adrenaline spiked, and each time I had to force myself to appear calm and unsuspecting. At 10:30, the real alert came. "Subject spotted approaching on foot from the rear of the property. All units maintain position. Mrs. Whitfield, we see her. She's coming to your back door." Through the kitchen window, I caught a glimpse of blonde hair and a dark jacket moving through my garden. Victoria looked different. Thinner, more angular, with her hair cut short and dyed brown. But her movements were purposeful and predatory as she approached my house. She's carrying a backpack, Detective Torres whispered through my earpiece. Assume it contains the items we saw her purchase. Stay calm, Mrs. Whitfield. We're in position. The soft sound of my back door handle being tested made my blood freeze. I hadn't locked it. Part of the plan to make entry easy for Victoria, but hearing her actually try to break into my home was terrifying in ways I hadn't anticipated. A minute later, I heard the door open with a quiet creak. Victoria was inside my house. Mrs. Whitfield, she's in the kitchen. Detective Torres's voice was barely audible. Continue acting normally. Don't look toward the kitchen until she makes her presence known. I forced myself to keep reading, though the words blurred together meaninglessly. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain Victoria would hear it from the next room. Footsteps moved slowly across my kitchen floor, pausing at what I guessed was the spot where she'd served me poisoned tea a week ago. The footsteps approached the living room. Hello, Eleanor. Victoria's voice was different, harder, colder than I'd ever heard it. I looked up from my book with what I hoped appeared to be genuine surprise, though seeing her standing in my doorway with that backpack slung over her shoulder and something metallic glinting in her hand made acting difficult. Victoria? What are you doing here? The police are looking for you. She smiled, but it was nothing like the polished, social expression I was used to seeing. This smile was predatory, almost feral. I know they are. That's why we need to have a little talk. She stepped into the living room, and I could see that the metallic object in her hand was indeed a knife, a utility knife with a wickedly sharp blade. The sight of it made my mouth go dry. You've caused me quite a bit of trouble, Eleanor, calling the police, getting blood tests, making accusations. Very inconsiderate of you. You tried to kill me, I said, proud that my voice remained steady. Tried? Victoria laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Oh, Eleanor, I didn't try to kill you last week. I tried to make you compliant, confused, easier to manipulate. If I'd wanted you dead from arsenic poisoning, you'd be dead. The casual way she admitted to poisoning me was chilling. What do you want, Victoria? What I've always wanted. Your money, your house. Your conveniently timed death that will solve all of Benjamin's and my financial problems. She moved closer, the knife held casually but visibly. The difference is that now we're going to do this the direct way. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a stack of papers. These are legal documents transferring ownership of your house to Benjamin, along with power of attorney over your finances and instructions for your funeral arrangements. You're going to sign them. And if I refuse? Victoria's smile widened. You're not going to refuse, Eleanor. Because if you do, I'm going to use this knife to hurt you in ways that will make you beg to sign those papers. And then, after you've signed them, I'm going to kill you anyway. The matter-of-fact way she laid out her plan was almost more frightening than the threat itself. This wasn't desperation or passion. This was cold, calculated evil. The police know you're here, I said, hoping to unnerve her. No, they don't. I've been watching this house for hours. The neighborhood is quiet. Even your nosy neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, has her lights off. Victoria set the papers on my coffee table and produced a pen. Now let's get started. Sign the first document. I looked down at the papers, noting that they'd been expertly prepared. Someone had put considerable thought into the legal language and formatting. Did you prepare these yourself? I had help. Amazing what people will do for cash when they think they're helping with estate planning. Victoria moved behind my chair, and I felt the cold metal of the knife blade against my neck. Sign the document, Eleanor. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Through my earpiece, I could hear Detective Torres' voice. We're moving in. Keep her talking for 30 more seconds. 30 seconds felt like an eternity with a knife at my throat, but I forced myself to remain calm. Victoria, you don't have to do this. If you stop now, if you surrender, you could probably plea bargain for a lighter sentence. Lighter sentence for what? I haven't actually killed anyone yet. The knife pressed harder against my skin, though that's about to change if you don't pick up that pen. The arsenic could have killed me, but it didn't. And legally, attempted murder is much harder to prove than you might think, especially when the victim has a history of mental health issues and paranoid delusions. I don't have any history of mental health issues. Victoria laughed. You will. Amazing what kind of medical history can be created with the right documentation and a few strategic conversations with healthcare providers. By the time I'm finished, everyone will believe you'd been suffering from dementia for months. The calculated nature of her plan was breathtaking. She hadn't just tried to kill me. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation and credibility to support her story. Time's up, Detective Torres's voice said through my earpiece. Police! Drop the weapon! The shout came from multiple directions as officers burst through both my front and back doors simultaneously. Victoria spun around, the knife still in her hand, her face twisted with rage and panic. You set me up, she snarled, turning back toward me with the knife raised. That's when I pressed the panic button. The room exploded into chaos. Victoria lunged toward me with the knife, but Officer Martinez tackled her from the side, sending both of them crashing into my bookshelf. Books scattered everywhere as they struggled, Victoria screaming obscenities and fighting like a cornered animal. It took 3 officers to subdue her completely. Even with her hands cuffed behind her back, she continued to thrash and threaten, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. Eleanor Whitfield, you stupid old bitch, she screamed as they dragged her toward the door. You have no idea what you've done. Benjamin will never forgive you for this. Your own son will hate you forever. Detective Torres appeared at my side, helping me to a chair as the other officers processed the scene. Are you hurt, Mrs. Whitfield? I touched my neck where the knife had pressed against my skin. There was a small cut, but nothing serious. I'm fine. Did you get everything you needed? We got more than enough. The confession, the documents, the knife, the backpack full of evidence. Victoria just handed us a conviction on a silver platter. As they led Victoria away, still screaming threats and accusations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks, complete and total relief. The nightmare was over. Victoria was in custody, Benjamin was safe from her influence, and I was alive. But even as I celebrated this victory, I knew that the hardest part might still be ahead of me. Victoria had been right about one thing. This would change my relationship with Benjamin forever. The question was whether our family bond would survive the truth about the woman he'd married. The aftermath of Victoria's arrest brought consequences I never could have anticipated. What I thought would be the end of our nightmare turned out to be just the beginning of a different kind of hell. Benjamin didn't speak to me for 3 days. Detective Torres called Friday morning to inform me that Victoria had been charged with attempted murder in the 1st degree, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud. She'd been denied bail due to flight risk and was being held at the Hartford Correctional Center pending trial. The evidence against her is overwhelming, he assured me. The recorded confession alone would be enough to convict, but combined with the arsenic in your blood, the forged documents, and the physical evidence we collected, this is about as solid a case as we could hope for. What happens now? She'll likely try to plea bargain, but given the severity of the charges and the premeditated nature of the crimes, the prosecutor is pushing for the maximum sentence. We're looking at 15 to 20 years in prison. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt empty. Victoria was behind bars, I was safe, but my family was destroyed. The son I'd raised and loved for 33 years couldn't even look at me. Ruby found me crying in her kitchen that afternoon, staring at my untouched lunch. Talk to me, honey. What's going on in that head of yours? Benjamin blames me, I said. He thinks I destroyed his marriage for money. Did he tell you that? He didn't have to. I can see it in his eyes. He thinks I set Victoria up, that I could have handled this differently. Ruby sat down across from me, her expression serious. Eleanor, that woman tried to kill you. Twice. She was planning to torture you into signing over your assets and then murder you. How exactly does Benjamin think you should have handled that differently? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Benjamin's name appeared on the screen, and my heart leaped with hope that he was finally ready to talk. "Mom," his voice was cold, formal. "I need to see you." "Of course. Do you want to come to Ruby's? Or I'll pick you up in an hour. There are some things we need to discuss." When Benjamin arrived, his face was haggard, and his eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He barely acknowledged Ruby's greeting and didn't meet my eyes as I gathered my purse. The drive was silent until we reached Riverside Park, where Theodore and I used to bring Benjamin to play when he was small. He parked overlooking the Connecticut River and finally turned to face me. "I saw Victoria this morning," he said without preamble. "You visited her in jail?" "She's my wife, Mom. Was my wife. I don't know anymore." He rubbed his face with both hands. "She told me things. About the night you had her arrested. About what really happened." My stomach clenched. "What did she tell you?" "She said you set her up, that you knew she was in financial trouble and you used the police to entrap her into saying things that could be taken out of context." "Benjamin, she confessed to poisoning me. She held a knife to my throat and threatened to kill me. How is that out of context?" "She says you drugged yourself with arsenic to frame her, that you've been planning this for months because you never liked her and wanted to break up our marriage." The accusation was so ludicrous, so divorced from reality, that I actually laughed. "Benjamin, do you hear yourself? You think I poisoned myself with enough arsenic to nearly kill me, then orchestrated an elaborate police sting operation, all to frame a woman I mildly disliked? I don't know what to think anymore." His voice broke. 3 days ago, I was married to a woman I loved. Now she's in prison for trying to kill my mother. Either my wife is a monster or my mother is a manipulative liar. Those are my only 2 options. No, they're not. There's a third option, that your wife fooled both of us, and you're having trouble accepting that someone you loved was capable of such evil." Benjamin was quiet for a long time, staring out at the river. "She cried when she told me about the setup. Real tears, Mom." She looked broken. "And she said something that I can't get out of my head." "What?" "She said that if the situation were reversed, if someone had tried to destroy our marriage and put me in prison, she would have fought for me. She would have believed in my innocence no matter what the evidence showed." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "You think I should have protected her, even after she tried to kill me?" "I think maybe there were other ways to handle this. Maybe you could have talked to me first? Given me a chance to work things out with Victoria privately?" "Benjamin, she poisoned me. She was planning to torture and murder me. What exactly would you have worked out?" "I don't know. Maybe therapy, maybe financial counseling, maybe just something other than destroying her life completely." I stared at my son, trying to understand how the evidence of his wife's crimes had somehow transformed into accusations against me. "Are you saying you wish I hadn't reported the poisoning to the police?" "I'm saying I wish you had trusted me enough to talk to me before you involve strangers in our family problems." "Our family problems?" "Benjamin, attempted murder isn't a family problem. It's a felony. And now Victoria's life is ruined, my marriage is over, and I don't know if I can ever trust you again." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My own son, the child I'd raised and sacrificed for, was choosing his would-be murderer wife over his mother. "Benjamin, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Victoria didn't just try to kill me once. She's been planning this for months. The arsenic was just the first attempt. When that didn't work fast enough, she came back with a knife and detailed plans to torture me into signing over my assets. If the police hadn't intervened, I would be dead right now. According to you and the police. But Victoria says, Victoria is a liar and a criminal who was caught red-handed trying to murder me." I was shouting now, all pretense of calm discussion abandoned. "She confessed, Benjamin. The police have recordings of her admitting everything. People say things under pressure. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she felt cornered and said what she thought you wanted to hear." I felt something break inside me, not just my heart, but my faith in my son's fundamental decency. "You really believe that?" You really think I'm capable of framing an innocent woman for attempted murder? Benjamin's silence was answer enough. Take me back to Ruby's, I said quietly. Mom, I'm not saying I believe Victoria completely. I'm just saying that maybe the truth is more complicated than… Take me back, now. The drive back to Ruby's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. When Benjamin pulled into the driveway, I got out without a word and walked toward the front door. Mom, wait! Benjamin's voice stopped me. I do love you. And I'm grateful that you're alive. I just need time to process all of this. I turned to face him one last time. Benjamin, your wife tried to kill me. She was planning to inherit my money and my house after murdering me. The police have overwhelming evidence of her guilt. If you need time to process those facts, then maybe you're not the man I thought I raised. I went inside and closed the door, leaving my son sitting in his car in the driveway. Ruby was waiting in the living room, and from her expression I could tell she'd heard at least part of our conversation through the window. He doesn't believe me, I said simply. He will eventually. The evidence is too strong, and Victoria's story is too ridiculous. Benjamin is just in shock right now. People don't want to believe that someone they loved could be capable of such evil. But that evening brought news that shattered even Ruby's optimism. Detective Torres called with an update that changed everything. Mrs. Whitfield, we have a problem. Victoria's lawyer has filed a motion claiming that the arrest was entrapment and that her confession was coerced. They're arguing that you and the police conspired to create a situation where an innocent woman was forced to defend herself against what she believed was a genuine threat. That's insane. She came to my house with a knife and forged legal documents. I know. But her lawyer is claiming those were planted evidence, and that Victoria only entered your house because she was concerned about your mental health and wanted to check on you. What does this mean for the case? It means we're going to trial, and it's going to be ugly. Victoria's defense team is going to paint you as a vindictive mother-in-law who destroyed an innocent woman's life. They're going to claim you poisoned yourself, that you manipulated Benjamin against his wife, and that you used the police to frame Victoria for crimes she didn't commit. After Detective Torres hung up, I sat in Ruby's living room feeling more isolated than I had since Theodore's death. My son believed his wife over his mother. The legal system was going to put me on trial as much as Victoria. And somewhere in a jail cell, the woman who'd tried to kill me was planning her defense strategy with lawyers who specialized in making victims look like villains. The battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't sure I had the strength to win. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, 4 months after Victoria's arrest. The Hartford County Courthouse was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and what seemed like half of Willowbrook. The case had gained national attention as a story about family betrayal, elder abuse, and the lengths people would go to for money. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, wearing my navy blue suit and Theodore's wedding ring on a chain around my neck for strength. Ruby sat beside me, her hand firmly clasped in mine. Benjamin was nowhere to be seen. He'd chosen to attend sporadically, always sitting on Victoria's side of the courtroom when he did appear. District Attorney Sarah Chen, no relation to Dr. Williams' earlier mention of an artist named Sarah Chen, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in elder abuse cases. During our preparation meetings, she'd assured me that Victoria's defense strategy was desperate and would ultimately backfire. The evidence is overwhelming, she told me, but Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to be prepared for what's coming. Victoria's lawyer, Marcus Brennan, is known for aggressive victim-blaming tactics. He's going to try to make you look like the villain in this story. She hadn't been exaggerating. Brennan's opening statement painted me as a manipulative, money-obsessed widow who'd orchestrated an elaborate frame job against an innocent young woman. According to his version of events, I'd been resentful of Victoria's youth and beauty, jealous of her relationship with Benjamin, and determined to destroy their marriage at any cost. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Brennan said in his polished baritone voice. "This case isn't about attempted murder. It's about a bitter old woman who weaponized the legal system against her daughter-in-law. Eleanor Whitfield didn't just want Victoria out of her son's life. She wanted her destroyed completely. He claimed I'd poisoned myself with small amounts of arsenic over several days, timing my symptoms to coincide with Victoria's visit. He suggested I'd planted the forged documents in Victoria's bag, coached the police on what to expect, and manipulated the entire confrontation to create false evidence." "Why would anyone go to such extreme lengths?" he asked the jury rhetorically. "Because Eleanor Whitfield couldn't stand the thought of sharing her son's love with another woman. Because she'd rather see Victoria in prison than see Benjamin happy in his marriage. Listening to my life and motivations being twisted into something unrecognizable was agonizing. But worse was seeing Benjamin in the gallery, nodding along with parts of Brennan's argument. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. DHN started with Dr. Williams, who testified about the arsenic levels in my blood and the impossibility of self-administered poisoning at those concentrations. To achieve the levels we found in Mrs. Whitfield's system through self-administration would require knowledge of precise dosing that a layperson wouldn't possess, Dr. Williams explained. Moreover, the symptoms she presented with, the tremors, nausea, and metallic taste, are consistent with a single large dose, not the gradual accumulation that would result from self-poisoning. Detective Torres testified about the investigation, the surveillance footage of Victoria purchasing suspicious materials, and her flight to Hartford Airport after learning of the inquiry. The forensics expert explained how arsenic residue had been found on my tea service, specifically on the pieces Victoria had handled. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source, Victoria's former business partner, Dr. Amanda Foster. Dr. Foster was a psychiatrist who'd briefly partnered with Victoria on a wellness coaching venture the previous year. Under oath, she revealed conversations that chilled the courtroom. Victoria had discussed her frustration with Eleanor's financial independence on multiple occasions, Dr. Foster testified. She felt that Benjamin was being shortchanged by his mother's refusal to help them financially. During one conversation, she specifically mentioned that elderly people sometimes suffer cognitive decline that makes them vulnerable to accidents or poor decision-making. Did Ms. Ashford ever discuss specific scenarios involving Mrs. Whitfield's potential incapacitation or death? DHN asked. Yes. She mentioned that if Eleanor were to require assisted living due to health issues, Benjamin would naturally assume control of her finances. She also discussed how elderly people sometimes died unexpectedly from falls or medical emergencies, and how such deaths were rarely investigated thoroughly if the person had a history of health problems. Dr. Foster's testimony revealed that Victoria had been planning this for over a year, carefully researching how to create the appearance of natural decline in an elderly person. The defense's counterattack was vicious, but ultimately ineffective. Brennan called character witnesses who testified about my supposed controlling behavior and resentment toward Victoria. He brought in a toxicologist who suggested, without much conviction, that self-poisoning was theoretically possible. But his biggest mistake was putting Victoria on the stand. Victoria had clearly been coached extensively, but under DHN's cross-examination, her carefully constructed story began to fall apart. When confronted with the security footage of her purchasing rope and knives, she claimed she'd been planning a camping trip. When asked about the detailed forged legal documents found in her possession, she suggested I must have planted them in her bag during our confrontation. Ms. Ashford, DHN said, pulling out the transcript of Victoria's confession, "I'd like you to listen to your own voice from the night of your arrest." The courtroom fell silent as Victoria's recorded voice filled the room. "I tried to make you compliant, confused, easier to manipulate. If I'd wanted you dead from arsenic poisoning, you'd be dead." Ms. Ashford, can you explain to the jury why you would say you'd tried to make Mrs. Whitfield, quote, compliant and confused if you were innocent of poisoning her? Victoria's composure finally cracked. She was threatening me. She had me cornered in that house with police everywhere. I said whatever I thought would keep her from having me killed. Are you testifying that you believed Mrs. Whitfield, a 71-year-old woman, was going to have you killed during a police operation? I was terrified. I wasn't thinking clearly. But you were thinking clearly enough to bring forged legal documents transferring Mrs. Whitfield's assets to your husband? I never. Those weren't. She planted those. D.A. Chen produced Victoria's fingerprints, found on every page of the forged documents. She showed bank records proving Victoria had paid a disbarred attorney $5,000 to prepare the paperwork. She presented evidence of Victoria's internet searches for Elder Abuse Laws Connecticut and arsenic poisoning symptoms, dating back 6 months before my illness. By the time Victoria left the stand, her credibility was completely destroyed. The most painful moment came when Benjamin testified for the defense. My own son, standing in a courtroom, suggested that my accusations against his wife might be motivated by jealousy and control rather than truth. My mother has always been very protective of our relationship, he said, not meeting my eyes. She's made comments about Victoria not being good enough for me, about our lifestyle being too expensive. I think she saw this as an opportunity to end my marriage permanently. But even Benjamin's testimony backfired when D.A. Chen cross-examined him about his family's financial situation. Mr. Whitfield, were you aware that your wife had accumulated over $80,000 in credit card debt without your knowledge? No, I wasn't. Were you aware that she'd been forging your signature on loan applications? No. Were you aware that she'd taken out a second mortgage on your house without telling you? Benjamin's face went white. What? Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit 47, bank records showing unauthorized loans totaling $125,000, all signed with your forged signature, Mr. Whitfield. The courtroom erupted as Benjamin realized the extent of Victoria's financial deception. For the first time, he looked at his wife with something approaching horror. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Victoria's scream of rage echoed through the courtroom as the verdict was read. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison without possibility of parole for 12 years. But for me, the real vindication came afterward, when Benjamin approached me in the courthouse hallway with tears streaming down his face. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I should have believed you from the beginning. The financial records D.A. Chen had revealed showed that Victoria had been systematically defrauding Benjamin for years. She'd used his identity to take out loans, credit cards, and even a second mortgage, all while maintaining the appearance of a successful marketing consultant. She destroyed everything, Benjamin said, his voice broken. Our marriage, our finances, our family. And I almost let her destroy my relationship with you, too. I held my son as he sobbed in my arms, finally understanding the full scope of what Victoria had done to both of us. She hadn't just tried to kill me. She'd tried to kill our family bond, turning us against each other so she could benefit from the destruction. We'll get through this, I told Benjamin. We're family, real family, and that means we protect each other, not destroy each other. As we left the courthouse together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Victoria was going to prison for a very long time. The truth had been revealed. And most importantly, my son had finally seen through the lies to the woman who'd tried to destroy us all. The nightmare was truly over. Now we could begin to heal. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, I stood in my garden on a crisp October morning, deadheading the last roses of the season. The familiar rhythm of the work, snip, examine, snip again, had become a form of meditation, a way to mark the passage of time and the gradual healing of wounds that had once seemed too deep to mend. The garden looked different now. I'd planted new varieties alongside Theodore's original roses, creating a living testament to both preservation and growth. The memorial bench Benjamin had installed near the oak tree bore a simple inscription, "In memory of Theodore Whitfield and in celebration of Eleanor's strength." It had been his idea, his way of acknowledging both the husband I'd lost and the mother he'd almost lost to his own blindness. "Mama, the coffee's ready," Benjamin called from the kitchen window. He'd developed a habit of stopping by Saturday mornings, a routine we'd established during the long months of rebuilding our relationship after the trial. The man who called to me now was different from the one who'd testified for Victoria. Humbler, more careful with trust, but also more genuine in his affection. Inside, Benjamin was setting out 2 mugs at my kitchen table, the same table where Victoria had once outlined her plans to institutionalize me. The room had been completely renovated after the trial. New cabinets, new countertops, new memories to replace the ones stained by betrayal. I'd thought about moving, but Ruby had convinced me that running away would give Victoria a posthumous victory she didn't deserve. "Any word from the publisher?" Benjamin asked as I settled into my chair. I smiled, still amazed by the turn my life had taken. "They want to fast-track the release for next spring. The editor thinks the timing will be perfect." True crime stories are hugely popular right now. The survivor story, How I Caught My Daughter-in-Law's Murder Plot, would be my first book, written with the help of a professional ghostwriter who'd helped me transform the nightmare into something that might help other families recognize the warning signs of financial elder abuse. The advance was modest, but the real reward was the possibility that my experience might prevent someone else from enduring what I'd survived. "Are you ready for the publicity tour?" Benjamin asked. "It's going to bring everything back into the public eye." I considered his question carefully. The past 2 years had been deliberately quiet, focused on healing and rebuilding. The book would inevitably attract attention, interviews, perhaps even a television adaptation that the publisher had hinted about. But I'd learned something important during Victoria's trial. My story belonged to me, and I had the right to tell it on my own terms. "I'm ready," I said. "The story needs to be told, Benjamin. Do you know how many people have written to me since the trial? Hundreds of letters from elderly people who recognized similar patterns in their own families. From adult children who realized their parents might be in danger. From law enforcement officers who said the case helped them identify other financial abuse situations." Benjamin nodded, his expression serious. The guilt he carried about his role in Victoria's scheme had transformed into a passionate advocacy for elder abuse awareness. He'd left his job at the financial planning firm to start a nonprofit organization focused on protecting seniors from financial exploitation. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The son who'd nearly been complicit in my financial destruction had become a champion for others facing similar threats. "Speaking of letters," Benjamin said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "this came to the office yesterday. I thought you should see it." The envelope was addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, CO Connecticut Elder Protection Initiative, Benjamin's nonprofit. The return address was Hartford Correctional Center. Victoria's name was written in the same handwriting that had once signed birthday cards and holiday thank you notes. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was brief, written in Victoria's careful script. "Eleanor, I know you'll probably never read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I'm not going to apologize because I don't think you'd believe me if I did. I'm not going to claim I was innocent because the evidence spoke for itself. What I want to say is that I understand now why you fought back. In prison, I've met women who were victims of the kind of manipulation I used against you. I've seen what it does to people, how it destroys their sense of reality and safety. I want you to know that I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you were strong enough to protect yourself. I'm glad Benjamin finally saw the truth, even though it cost me everything. You deserved better from your family. You deserved better from me. I hope you're finding peace. Victoria." I read the letter twice, then handed it to Benjamin. I watched his face as he processed his ex-wife's words, saw the complex mixture of pain and closure that crossed his features. "What do you think?" he asked finally. I think she's learned something about consequences. Whether it's genuine remorse or just prison wisdom, I can't say. But Benjamin, it doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't change the fact that we survived it. Do you forgive her? The question had been weighing on my mind for months. Forgiveness was complicated when the person who'd wronged you had tried to kill you. But I'd learned something important during my recovery. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I forgive her for my own peace of mind, I said finally. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting. Victoria made choices that could have destroyed our entire family. The consequences of those choices are hers to live with. After Benjamin left, I walked back out to my garden, Victoria's letter still in my hand. I'd decided what to do with it. Near the back fence, I'd created a small fire pit where I burned garden debris and, occasionally, reminders of painful memories that no longer served me. The letter caught fire quickly, curling into ash and smoke that drifted away on the autumn breeze. As I watched it burn, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I'd survived attempted murder, family betrayal, a public trial, and the long process of rebuilding trust with the son I'd raised. Through it all, I'd discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed, and built relationships that were stronger than the ones I'd lost. Ruby appeared at my back gate, carrying a casserole dish and wearing the knowing smile of someone who understood that some conversations required comfort food. "Burning bridges again?" she asked, nodding toward the fire pit. "Just clearing out old paperwork," I said, which was true enough. "Good. The past is for learning from, not living in." She handed me the casserole. "Tuna noodle. I made extra because I know Benjamin will be back tomorrow to help with the storm windows." As we walked back toward the house together, I reflected on how different my life looked now compared to 2 years ago. Then, I'd been a victim, isolated, manipulated, and nearly murdered by someone I'd tried to love. Now I was a survivor, an advocate, and an author. I had a purpose beyond my own safety and comfort. The house felt welcoming as we entered, filled with the kind of warm domesticity that Victoria had tried to steal from me. But more than that, it felt like home. Not just a place where I lived, but a sanctuary I'd fought to protect and earned the right to keep. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I found myself standing at my bedroom window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd spent most of my adult life. Mrs. Patterson's light was on across the street. She was probably reading her mystery novels and would wave if she saw me. The Kowalskis' porch light provided a welcoming glow for anyone who might need it. These were my people, my community, the life I'd chosen and successfully defended. I thought about Theodore and how proud he would have been of the woman I'd become in his absence. I thought about Benjamin and the man he was growing into, stronger, wiser, and more protective of the people who mattered. I thought about the letters from strangers who'd found courage in my story, and the families who might be safer because of the awareness my book would create. Victoria was in prison, where she would remain for many years to come. The woman who'd tried to steal my life, my money, and my family had lost everything instead. Justice had been served, relationships had been restored, and life had moved forward in ways I couldn't have imagined during those dark days when I'd been fighting for my survival. As I turned off the light and settled into bed, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Theodore's death: complete peace. Not because my life was perfect, but because it was mine. I'd protected what mattered, fought for what was right, and built something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. The doctors had said the arsenic should have killed me within hours. But somehow I'd survived. And in surviving, I discovered that sometimes the greatest victory isn't avoiding the battle, but emerging from it stronger than you were before. In the quiet darkness of my bedroom, surrounded by the familiar sounds of a house that truly belonged to me, I smiled and drifted off to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chapters in a story that was far from over. But tonight I was simply Eleanor Whitfield, survivor, mother, neighbor, friend, and proof that sometimes the strongest people are forged in the fires they never expected to face. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.